back to the Rugby League Digest. I'm Michael Adams here with Andrew Paskin.
Hello, mates.
We're here outside the site of some of Rugby League's most famous victories, the Supreme Court of New South Wales. We've just had another great thrill in interviewing the great Kevin Ryan. Great of St George, great of the game. Had a fantastic chat with him.
Yeah, I mean, very intellectual rugby league player. Obviously a barrister and a former mayor. He's provided some amazing stories from that era. Yeah, the hardest of the hard. Beatson, Sattler, Kelly, all these blokes, he's the one they'll name. My hand's still recovering from the handshake I got from him at 83 years of age. Mine too, yeah.
We'll just throw to the interview now, but had a really great chat with Kevin Ryan, and I hope you enjoy this.
Thank you.
So we're here with Kevin Ryan, legend of Rugby League. I should say at the outset I'm a lifelong St George man, so
Very
Andrew's
good.
here to rein me in if I get too fawning. Got a long, distinguished career to cover, so we'll just get stuck into it. Firstly, starting with your Brisbane Rugby Union career, why did you decide to make the switch and come down to Sydney?
Well, I played for Brothers at that stage for 6 seasons, and Frank Facer and a couple of his cohorts came to see me up there in the middle of a game against Toowoomba, actually. And then they made an offer to me which had been prompted by Alan Clarkson, who'd got in touch previously with them and sung my praises. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I signed up, not immediately, but for 1960.
And why had you decided to make the switch? Was it just that offer, or were you thinking about coming down prior to
Well,
that?
I had played rugby league in the country as a boy, and I was attracted to it, and obviously, I could earn a bit of money, not very much I might add, but I could earn money, so between them all, and at that stage I'd had 2 tours for Australia, to the British Isles and then to New Zealand, and so I made the switch.
I'm interested in the 50s and 60s. The games were quite a bit more similar, would you say, Union and League in those days?
Yes, they would have been more similar than they are today. I think that's right. The scrums were still a bit different, but one remarkable thing about going to St George was that St George had been under the tutelage of Ken Carney, Killer Carney, the hooker, Wallaby hooker, for something like 4 or 5 years at that stage. And Norm Provan was in the second row, and those two were very good scrums. They really believed in getting down low and pushing, and so the St George scrum was the closest you'd ever find in rugby league to a rugby union scrum, where the emphasis is obviously on winning the ball.
How would you rate the difference in toughness? I mean, you're a legendary hard man. You make all the lists, and all the top hard men to put you on the top of their list. How would you compare in those days going from union to league in terms of toughness?
Well, there were some tough guys in rugby union that I played with and toured with, and that was Tony Miller was one at Manly, second row, and there was several others, and but I suppose there was, and I was probably impressed by the fact that St George had a particularly hard group of forwards. They had, apart from Norm Provan, they had Billy Wilson and Killer Carney, and later on Ian Walsh, and also John Roper, who was not a big fellow but was very hard and durable.
I've got lots of questions to ask about all those blokes, but I just want to keep on your arrival at St George in Sydney. Being that this was the pre-television era, how much did you know about the St George team? Obviously, a legendary team.
Very little, other than what I'd sort of been told and read in the paper about their continuing wins. But I was very impressed because Facer was a hands-on man. He played in a 1949 grand final as a hooker for St George, and he was very much hands-on and very much in control, and there was a big link, and they had a player-coach system then. So there was a direct link from Facer to Carney, and then later on Proven, and then later on Walsh, while I was there. And so it was a team that was functional in terms of playing rugby league to win the ball and win the game.
Facer, universally admired, if not universally loved. He seems he was a pretty tough bloke to deal with.
He had his faults. He certainly wasn't the perfect gentleman, but he was, I think, basically very honest and knew what he was on about. You know, he was a CEO in today's jargon who knew what the game was about, which is pretty rare today.
Would you say he was ahead of his time, or were there any of the other club bosses as?
Oh yes, there were a lot of the other club bosses were former players, but they weren't as astute as Facer. He was very smart and had the players with him too. He had the respect of the players. They might have liked him. He might have endeared himself to them, but they respected him.
Interesting anecdote from Michael's research, and it says a lot about your character as well as Frank Facer's style of administration. He come to see you personally, whereas West's were making him an offer but couldn't be bothered to come up to Queensland.
That's right. I had offers from West, and I think it was Manly at the time. Maybe another one, but those two, and but neither of those came to see me. Facer arrived up there and in his full regalias, St George hat, blazer, tie.
That sounds like Michael on a Sunday.
So in the Larry Ryder book, you mentioned Harry Bath as being a big influence when you did arrive at St George, and someone who kind of showed you the ropes of rugby league.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about Harry Bath, the man, like what you learned
from
him?
Very impressive fellow, Harry Bath, a former Brisbane player. He'd gone to England and played for various clubs and a long time in England. He's a very experienced front rower in England. And what made him more helpful to me was the fact that the north of England in those days were buying South African rugby union forwards and Welsh rugby union forwards, and they had to be accommodated to rugby league and skilled in the arts, and that was Harry Bath's job where he was. So he spent a lot of time coaching South Africans and rugby union players from Wales, and I benefited from that. I used to literally sit at his feet and talk the game and talk the north of England and scrumming and all the rest of it.
I can't remember who it was. It might have been Proven who said that he was the most important signing in that whole run. Would you go along with that?
It'd be, if not the most important, certainly probably one of the top ranking fellows, because he contributed as a player. By the time I came, he'd stopped playing the year before, but he was coached, and this is why I would benefit from him, because I was in the seconds for about the first half of the season. So he was coach of the seconds, and I benefited from his presence very much.
On the subject of great men, Norm Proven, he took you under his wing when you come down from Queensland originally, is that right?
Yes. Norm was one of the first fellows I met at St George, and I was friends with him socially and on the field, and I respected him, and I hope he did me.
Would you say he was ahead of his time with the training in the day?
Yes, he was very much into physical fitness. We were probably the fittest side in the comp, and we were fit from the word go, because for 2 months or so before the game, we'd be running on the beach at Cronulla round to the entrance to Botany Bay and up Sandhills. There were sandhills there before they shoved them off and sold them. And we were very fit, and he kept us that way during the season.
Were you a good trainer?
I was a good trainer, yes. I'd been a good trainer in rugby union, and I continued to be, even more so, I suppose.
I wanted to ask about Ken Carney, who was your coach when you first arrived at St George. Again, we keep saying the phrase ahead of his time, but it seems that he was doing a few things with coaching that not many other blokes were doing at the time.
Yes, well, there's no doubt about that, and the reason is obvious, really. He'd had this he'd been with Rugby Union for a number of years, played in tests in the British Isles and New Zealand, and then switched to the North of England League and had probably not as many years as Harry Bath over there, but probably 5, 6, 7 or something, and then came back here, so he knew both codes, and he knew, well, England was the best in the world, in the rugby league world at that stage. They're not now, far from it, but they were at that stage, and he'd benefited from that, and he imparted that into St George he played with for a couple of years before I came, and then into the second that he coached when I was there.
He said also in the Larry Ryder book, he said that when you first arrived, he wasn't really in favour of you coming because he was a big fan of Kevin Brown as a prop.
That's right.
Did you notice that at the time when you first arrived, or?
Yes, but I took it in my stride. I accepted that even though I was a rugby union international, that I had to learn the game, and I didn't mind spending my half year and half a season in the seconds. And he had two good props. He had Kevin Brown and Billy Wilson. You couldn't find better in terms of toughness and skill. And obviously he wanted to keep them. He'd had a winning combination with them now for 4 or 5 years, and he wanted to keep them. But as it turned out, Billy got, when I was playing seconds, Billy got sent off for a couple of weeks, and he brought me up, and then I went okay for the rest of the season. And then the time came in the grand final, and he had to decide between Wilson, Brown and myself. So Kevin Brown got dropped.
Pretty interesting character, Billy Wilson. Was he a fun person to?
Oh, he was a fun person and very tough. I don't think I've ever played with anyone or against anyone. I later on played against him for a couple of years when he was over the hill. But he was very good, and not only tough but skillful too, and knew the game, and was a good inspiration to players. He inspired players very much.
And he ended up playing till about 40, didn't he?
Yeah, he went to North Sydney after he left St George, and actually captained Australia from North Sydney for a year against New Zealand, I think.
When you first arrived, how did you find the standard of Sydney football compared to what you'd been playing in Brisbane? Well,
it was obviously a different game, but it was very high, and St George led the way. In those days, they had the system was the match of the day fixture, and St George drew that, most times 80%, I suppose, or more. So we sort of set the tone to some extent, and which was good, and good for the game, and obviously good for St George.
Did you like playing at the SCG? I've heard the pitch wasn't.
Yes, I enjoyed the SCG. I don't think it's a great ground for spectators because of the circular nature of it, but. In terms of playing there was nothing wrong, although at the end of the season, if it got wet, it could be a bog hole, because in the middle of the City Cricket Ground there's 8 cricket pitches composed of black soil from bulleye soil, which is full of slate, and when a couple of years, particularly one year, there was 11 weeks of continuous rain on weekends, and it was just a bog hole, and the slate was pretty rough, pretty cutting. Particularly if you got speared into it, which they did often.
As if the game couldn't be any tougher, you got to deal with that. Oh God.
Yes, I remember on one occasion, Jack Gibson and Calais Shea, who were both big, powerful blokes, were playing for St George, and they picked me up at the end of the 1963 grand final, I think, and I had this ball, and it was like a piece of soap, and I had both hands on it, and I knew that if I took a hand off it, I'd lose that ball, and we're only ahead at 2 or 3 points, then we're out, they were 20 metres from our goal, and they could win. So I had to hang on to this ball at all costs, and they speared me with the ball straight into the bull-eyed soil.
3 legendary grand finals there against Wests. Who would you call the best club team you played against in that run?
Oh, I think West at that time were the pick. They had probably more stars in inverted commas than St George, but they weren't as skilled or as maybe they were, but they weren't as determined and disciplined as St George.
We're going to bring up the name Darcy Lawler. You get an opinion from a legend on the Darcy Lawler legend.
Yeah. Well, Darcy was a great referee, and it was always alleged that he was crook, that he bet on games, etc. Now, I don't have any opinion on that, but I do know from my legal practice that later on I was in a long-running case against South Sydney Juniors, where they're a corrupt club, and he was the secondary manager there for a number of years, and you can draw your own conclusions.
We spoke to Noel Kelly recently, and I think his opinions on the 63 grand final are well known. As someone who was out there that day, did you think you were the better team?
Yes, it was always said that Johnny King had scored a disputed try, and it was alleged further, which I can't comment on, that Darcy Lawler was financially involved. But if you look at it again, I've seen it obviously many times since then, there's no doubt that Johnny King was not stopped in the tackle. He fell onto a knee and kept running. He wasn't on the ground, and the rule actually states quite clearly that a player, I forget the exact word, must be brought to a halt on the ground with the ball.
I've given Sapruta film level analysis on that play, and I agree with your opinion there.
Oh, thanks.
At the end of that season, you went away on the Kangaroo Tour, which a triumph for Australia, but somewhat of a disappointment personally.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I only played 4 games. I played the 4 of the first 5 or 6, I suppose, and on the 4th of my games, before the tests had come into view, we were playing Hull Kingston Rovers, and I went across and tackled someone, and Noel Kelly came across and behind me, and my leg was spread eagled across the fallen guy, and he fell across my leg on the ankle and just snapped everything in my knee, and that was the end of my tour.
Was it hard watching all the games from the sideline?
Yeah, it was. I spent the rest of the tour in a full-length plaster, and it wasn't fun, but that's the way it goes. It's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. Some of the stories from that era, those tours, it's quite dire in parts. You know, the accommodation, is that how you found it?
It was pretty tough. It was, the games concentrated in the north of England. We were at Wembley in London for a couple of occasions, but most of the English tour was in the north there, and things were pretty tough up there. It was, bear in mind, it's 63, what's that, 50 odd years ago, and things were pretty dire, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And the truism has always been that the rugby union tours were a lot more fancy and looked after on tour. Was that your experience?
Yeah, that's. I mean, in the rugby union tour, we, always had first class accommodation and all the rest of it, and everything was laid on, and it was all very good. But there was some we played the North of England tour in rugby union, and Wales, where it was pretty tough.
And on that tour, you had the coach of the tour on the sidelines with you, Arthur Summons, who got injured as well.
Yeah.
How did he deal with not being able to play? I can imagine that must be so frustrating.
Well, if he hadn't been coach, he probably would have been down in the dumps, but he remained as coach, and he had to be assisted by, for physical reasons, by Ian Walsh, who to a large extent took over the coaching, but Arthur was still the coach, and he played that role, and he played it very effectively.
And both men have spoken about their respect for each other, and that made the difficult situation a lot easier to deal with.
I'll tell you how they respected one another. Arthur Summons was approached by Wagga, one of the clubs down there, to be the secondary manager when he came back, and he wasn't able to do it for various reasons, probably one, his injury, but he recommended Walsh, and Walsh got the job.
Mm-hmm. So, an Australian touring team hadn't won in England in 50 years or so when they won, but it seems there was a kind of air of inevitability about it with the way Australia kind of won those first 2 test matches. Was that something that was felt among the squad? Did it? Yeah,
I think we were pretty dominant from the word go. We played in the first couple of games, 2 or 3 games, we played a couple of their hard teams in the north of England, hard men. mainly minors in their front rows and so on, and they were very tough, but we won convincingly in a lot of those important games, which obviously built up the morale.
Is there any names you could rattle off that you admired from the England team in terms of hardness and skill?
Yeah, well, Derek Turner was one that springs to mind, and there are others. They don't spring to mind at the moment. But Derek Turner, who always vied with Corellius, they were always vying for the English lock position, and sometimes one would be in favour, and next year the other would be in favour. And in fact, Turner came out here in '63, and Corellius, despite the fact that Corellius in say '60, '61 or something had played in the English lock, and then later on, when we were touring in '63, they went back to Corellius in the I think second or third test, I forget now. So they're both very good, and probably Corellius was faster than Turner, but Turner was very deft and skillful and tough.
Excellent.
You mentioned in the past one of the big disappointments of your career with St George was the match St George played against the Great Britain team in '62, was it?
Yeah.
How would you characterise that team? Was that the best team you faced?
Yes, but it sounds like an excuse, which it is, I suppose, but an explanation better than an excuse, I think. We weren't ready for England at the time. We'd had a string of injuries, and one of them was Norm Provan, and Reg Gazzi was the other one. They weren't fit. They were playing, but they weren't fit. And I can remember Billy Wilson pleaded and we'd been beaten by Parramatta, and they were in the doldrums. We'd been beaten by Parramatta on the Sunday, and we're due to play England on the Wednesday. And I can remember Billy Wilson pleading with the St George officials to cancel the game because they were pretty flexible. They were going to Queensland, and he said, wait till they go through Queensland, come back, we'll play them on the way back, or when they come back. And that didn't happen, and we weren't. I wasn't fit. I was carrying a torn ankle ligament, and Gaznia wasn't fit, and it was just a bad occasion. I've never got over it, actually. It hurt me very much.
I think the Hoops jersey was a bad omen from the start.
The which one?
The Hoops jersey.
Yeah. Yes, we were playing. Not that mattered on the field, but it was probably an omen.
On that subject, playing with injuries, I mean, in your era, everybody was playing hurt, were they not? Pretty much.
Well, you did play with injuries, but there's injuries and injuries, and I'd say out of the St George side at the time, there were 5 or 6 had serious injuries. One was Gaznia, and I had a serious injury, and there were 2 or 3 others badly, restricted.
But what sort of treatments were available to you then? For, say you did your ankle ligaments, you had a little bit of physio, or?
Yes, it wasn't. Well, I suppose the treatment in many respects was as good or better than today because it was more hands-on.
Right.
Here there's too much pulling of switches and plugging in rays and what have you. But injuries are injuries, and to do with them properly, you've got to take time off, and we didn't have that opportunity on this occasion.
Last question on the '63 tour. The second test, Johnny Raper's performance at Swinton is often held up as one of the best individual performances of all time. I imagine you were there that day.
Yes, yeah,
and
yeah.
What do you have to say about that game?
Oh, well, he was magnificent. The whole team were magnificent, really, running and passing and just wanting to win. That's where it all starts. You've got to be committed. You want to win. You've got to want to win. And you've got to get out there and do it.
Was that a big part of Raper's makeup, the will to win?
Oh, yes. He was born and bred with it. And he was just out there to win games. That's what he's all about. And the others, Langlands was the same, and Gaznia and Johnny King, Eddie Lumsden, all the time.
That's probably a good place to pivot to your St George career, which is obviously a big part of why I wanted to be here today. Can you put it into words what it was like to play with this team?
Well, they were legendary even at that time. When I came down from Queensland, I was a little bit overawed, even though I was rugby international at the time. And Proven is, in my opinion, an all-time great, even though he's... is he in the Immortals yet?
No, he's not. That's one of our questions, yeah.
So from that tone, I take it you suggest he should be in Immortal?
Oh, yeah, he should be one of the first picked.
Record unsurpassed.
Yeah, can I just ask about that? Because as people who never had the privilege to see him live, when you think about his candidacy for Immortals, it usually comes down to the 10 premierships. But what about him as a player?
Oh, well, he led on and off the field. He was a very tall, strong, powerful runner. Before his rugby league days, he'd been an athlete, and it was a 440 runner. And he could run a long distance fast, and he had big stride. But the important thing, he was an 80-minute player. He was just never stopped. So by comparison, West had Kel O'Shea, who was a little bit bigger than Norm, a bit faster, but Kel was a 10-minute on, 10-minute off sort of player, whereas Norm was there for 80 minutes. That was the difference. And and the others were in the same mould. Everyone was out there to win and play, and not to sort of carry on and raid around the place at all.
And what about as a man, Norm Proven?
Oh, admirable. He ran, apart from his football, he ran a business which he handed on to his kids. Later in life, he went to the north of Queensland and bred a cross with some cattle from the tropical area, and bought and they're still breeding up in North Queensland. This breed that resisted heat, but still presented good meat. It was pretty tricky with it too.
How about Peter Proven? Yeah.
Peter was very good. A smaller version of Norm, and he left St George pretty early on because St George had bought a couple of second rowers. One of them was Elton Rasmussen, who was very good, very big and fast from Queensland, and Peter wasn't getting picked regularly, so he took the opportunity with Balmain, where he excelled there for a while.
I wanted to also ask about each of the St George Immortals, so I just wondered if maybe one by one we can go through them and what made them so special. Yeah. So we'll start with Raper.
Well, Raper had come from Newtown when he was 17, and he was born into a big family, and he just had this spirit and this idealism that it was all about winning and getting fit. He was a fitness fanatic probably, and getting fit and staying that way and just winning. And he wasn't a flyer, but he was very fast, and he was a good skillful handler and a deft passer and backer up and all the rest of it. And he could read a game, very much so. He could read a game and pick holes. And I remember he set me up for a try in one of the grand finals, and he sort of looked ahead. You could see him in the film later on, looking ahead and picking the hole, and instead of passing the other side, got me on the run, and that was it.
As younger people, when Raper's talked about, it's always about the cover defence, and leagues change so much that we can't really get a sense of what that looked like and what that meant. And can you tell us about his cover defending?
Well, the game today is more sort of one-off sort of plays, whereas there were a lot of backline moves, really long backline moves. We went through 3, 4, 5, 6 sets of hands, and went to the winger, and cover defence was a huge matter, a huge asset to have, and we had it in Raper and others too. And he was a brilliant cover defender, but there were a few more. Coote was another one. Coote was similar to Raper, and probably a bit faster, but a similar cover defender. And he was very, very good, and there were others around, I can't think of, but there were a couple of others who were good versions of Raper, but he was out there by himself.
One point I want to bring up to ask you about Johnny Raper. My entire life I've never heard anything but he was the greatest forward and all sort of stuff, all positive. but he's also an immortal in the Larrikin Stakes.
Yeah, he was a wild doer, but I don't think he let it interfere with his performance on the field.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think if he turned that down, he would have been even better? Or
well, okay, if we concentrate just on that, yes, if he turned it down, he would have been better. But then it went hand in hand, probably with some of the reasons why he was good.
Yeah.
And if he toned that down, he might have lost something else. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And what about Reg Gasnier? What was it like?
Reg was truly an immortal. He was a flyer. I had the pleasure of sending him through once. I think it was in the grand final against South in 1965, and I got him on the fly, and away he went, and he was just going head back. Once he put his head back, and he was gone. And I turned around to go back and get ready for the next player. I heard the tone of the crowd. The yell for the crowd changed, and I went around. Coot had come from nowhere. Coot had come and boot-laced him a metre out the corner. But usually, that was very rare. The only time, I only ever saw one other occasion when someone ran him down, and that was when I was with Canterbury, and we had Ronnie Raper, the younger Raper, and Ronnie ran Gaz down, but Gaz might have been, slightly over the hill at that stage and could have been slowed down a bit, but Raper ran him down and saved the game for us. We won the grand final against St George.
Is there anyone in the modern game that you think would remind you of Reg, or?
There probably is, but they don't come readily to mind. I think he stands out by himself, and he just had that brilliance, and all the assets went with it. But he was so brilliant that he just, when he got the ball, he'd run around people and away he'd go. And unless you moved up on him very, very quickly and got him while he was taking the pass, he wouldn't be caught.
And the words that always are brought up with Gasnier are grace and elegance. Would you say he was the best player purely to watch if you were going to pick one player?
Oh yeah, Gasnier would be the best to watch. Later on, when Langlands came to the club about three years later, he was always compared with Gaz, and it'd be hard to separate them in the later years there.
What was the difference in style between Gasnier and Langlands?
Reg was sort of physically just so coordinated and well linked, but whereas Chango was a big step. Gaz wasn't a big stepper. He was just speed and swerve, and mainly he played a step too, but he didn't use much. Whereas Langlands was a big stepper. He was taller than Reg and lankier, and he could step either way, and a bit different in style, but similar in results.
I mean, we're talking about these great players. Each one of them has said about you, John Sattler included, players from outside St George, about your importance to that team and your role in that team. It's sort of like for lack of a better word, an enforcer. Is that something you
Yeah, I didn't see myself as an enforcer, but I suppose can be described that. I was just out there to win the ball and make sure when they won the ball that they were hit so hard they'd possibly lose it or certainly wouldn't go anywhere. That was what I was all about, mainly, but I ran occasionally too.
When we interviewed Noel Kelly, you were the only person he'd name by name as a tough opponent, so you're obviously intimidating the eyes of your opponents. Yeah,
well, I'd take that as a compliment from Ned, who was a hard man, and also from Ipswich. We were both from Ipswich. We didn't know one another in those days. He played league and I played union, but
and both with amateur boxing backgrounds too.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that, and I think he had a couple of fights too.
Quite an amazing football nursery, Ipswich. For such a small town.
It was in those days. Well, it was a mining town, not unlike the north of England. So you bred pretty hard sort of blokes there. And they had a big tradition. They could beat Brisbane in those days. Often did in what they call the Bulimba Cup up there.
So even though you were playing union, were you up to date on what was going on in the Bulimba Cup? Was that a...
Yes, not hands-on. I played out training and going to games myself in Union. But I was aware of what was going on, and I was aware of Kelly and his performances, but I never actually saw him play in Ipswich.
Yeah.
And when he came a year after me to Sydney. I came in '60, he came in '61, and obviously I got to know him in '61. Well, on the field anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw his wares then, and he was he was in a tough pack over there in West. They had Jack Gibson, and they had a couple of other hard men. And a very good lock. He was understudy to Raper. I can't think of his name, but they were a very good side.
Makes me wonder what would happen if the West official had travelled up to see you.
Yeah, well, I probably...
that might have been an intimidating pack.
I don't think I was obsessed with going to St George. Obviously, they were very prominent in my view, but if they'd come first, you never know.
We might have been talking about 4 premierships.
I wanted to ask about the 65 grand final.
I was talking about West's... I can't go without telling this story, and this is Kelly's story.
Mm.
He comes down in 1961, and this is the difference, West had a good guy, Bill Beaver, as secretary, but Frank Facer was official, whereas Bill was just a nice guy. And Bill had sort of rung Noel and said, "We'll see you down here for the start of the season, no reception or anything. Give me a ring when you get to Hornsby." So Noel drove down with his trailer and his few possessions. I don't know whether he had a kid or not, his wife and a kid or so. And he gets to Hornsby and he rings Bill Beaver, who's in a pub somewhere, a club somewhere, and says, "I'm here waiting, what do I do now," sort of business. And Bill says, he says, "Sorry, Noel, I forgot that you're coming." So he said, "Hang out there for a while and I'll ring you back." This is on public phone, no mobiles or anything. Stay at the phone there, and so half an hour later he rings back, "I've got a bloke to look after you out in Collaroy." And Manly, he's got a place there, he'll put you up for a while, see. So to cut a long story short, Noel and his wife went to Collaroy and they fell in love with the place. Even though they'd been in Ipswich, they'd never been to the surf really. They'd only been to, to Shorncliffe and Sandgate, which are part of muddy Moreton Bay. And they're in love with this. Suddenly they're on the beach. They've never left it. He managed to acquire himself a great spot up on Collaroy Plateau.
I'm surprised Zarko didn't get in there and swoop in before Bill Beaver had a chance to.
That's a great story.
But yeah, turning to 65, one of the most famous grand finals of all, and held up as one of your great games. What are your memories of that day?
I have very good memories of the 65 grand final. I was very committed to winning, and South were on the way up at that stage. They lapsed the next year, but then a year later they came good, I think, from memory. But they were the team to beat. They were much younger across the board than St George, and probably had a bit more stamina and so on. So it was a big day for us. We could see it as a real challenge, and we went out in that mode. And I can remember we kicked off, and I followed it up, and I missed tackling the prop forward. I hope it was the only miss of the game, but Norm Probyn swallowed him. Jim Morgan, he stepped me, and Norm got him. But after that, we were it was never huge. It wasn't a huge win. As I said, Gaz got run down by Ron Coote and a few other things, but we won convincingly, and it was a great win, and it stood out in our memory.
Because they'd beaten you a couple of times during the season, hadn't they?
Yeah, I think at least once I can remember, but I can't. So they were a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And going into that game, did you think that it all could end today, or were you guys still pretty confident?
Oh, we're always confident. Even though they'd beaten us during the season once or you say twice, we were out there to win. We didn't know anything about losing grand finals. I'd never lost one. I was there that was the 7th year and the 6th year, and we just didn't know any other way. We had to win. Not that we're overconfident. We still knew the job had to be done.
What was it like running out? Maybe upwards of 100,000 people there. Was that a bit of a shock to the system?
It was a big. It was probably the only time I could ever remember looking at the crowd. I looked at the crowd and it was huge, and then I looked up on the top of the stands. I forget the name of them now, but people were just packed, and I thought they're going to come through that roof. I had only galvanised iron there, which had held together by successive coats of green paint over many years. I thought they were going to all come through.
Incredible crowd.
So that was about my only distraction.
There's a name I just popped in my head. We don't talk about some of the other players in the team enough because of all the immortals and everything, but Brian Clay.
Oh, yes, yeah. Underrated. Was great. A great fellow too, on and off the field. Thorough gentleman. He was short and stocky, but powerfully built, and faster than people realise. And he was the rock on which the backline, St George backline, was built. He didn't send out any bad passes. If he got a bad pass in the next, they were moving up on Gaz and whoever else was there and so on, he wouldn't pass it. He'd just run himself and knock them down, and he used to do damage in attack. But when he did pass, it was the perfect pass. They were on their way to attack. You could guarantee 7 out of 10 Brian Clay passes to Gasly or whoever were about setting up tries.
And it seems the way you and the rest of the team talk about Brian Clay as a person, that really sums him up as a bloke as well as a player.
Yeah, he was a great fellow, very genuine guy, and proved it on and off the field with his family and so on.
Who were some of your other favourite teammates in that era?
Well, I would say I genuinely liked all of the side. I can't think of anyone in that St George side that I would have thought of as a very good, decent person.
I want to talk about your departure from St George and your Canterbury years. You left St George in somewhat acrimonious circumstances. How would you characterise your relationship with the administration at that point?
Well, that's probably the only occasion I would be critical of Fosa. I think he let me down then on that occasion. See, I'd never been a hard guy to bargain with. I remember I signed a 3-year contract and it expired when I was chosen to go on the Kangaroos, and I just walked in and said, sign me up again. They gave me a little bit more, and I didn't use it as a bargaining measure or anything. And then then I think I had another extension, and then I had this offer from Canterbury to coach, and I wanted to coach. I wanted to be in the mould of Carney and Proven and so on, and I wanted to do that, and he was being offered to me, captain coach, and I asked him to let me go. I mean, I'd played 7 grand finals and winning grand finals, and I thought I'd get, but I was treated very badly. I remember the very night when I made up my mind, I'd come in to see him, and they were meeting in the middle room under Cogger Oval there, Cogger Grandstand, and one of the others came out and said, we'll see you in an hour or so, and I waited about another hour or so, and then I just went up to the pub with the team. They were going on an end of season trip at that stage. I went up there and that was it. I just never went back.
A lot of the players have come out and said that letting you go was the worst move Fraser made, given that it ended the streak. Do you feel like you had something to prove when you went to Canterbury?
Oh yes, yeah. I felt well as a coach mainly. I don't think I had a lot to prove on the field, but I've had to keep playing well and but coaching as well. And it's an art, captain coach, and I enjoyed it. It's a very demanding role because you find you vulnerable to all sorts of criticism.
Well, that's a question we had lined up. In the captain coach era, very popular up until the 80s. So you had the politics of selecting teams and...
Oh yeah, you're right there with the political side of it.
So yeah, well, how did you find with that? Did the guys would go off you and they wouldn't talk around you and you're a bit separated, or...?
No, it didn't. I don't remember it ever affecting my relationship with the players, but I was certainly in all the, I won't say machinations, but dealings and so on. I remember on one occasion Peter Moore and myself went to New Zealand to buy the Kiwi international halfback, and his mother wouldn't let him come. So we went to a pub in the middle of the night down in the South Island. Oh, we chased him all across the South Island, and he had gone skiing or something. And when we finally cornered him in this pub belonging to a Kiwi Maori international, whose name I can't recall, but a good bloke, and he finally said, "No, my mother won't let me go." And so this Kiwi hooker said, "I know a bloke for you," and he said, "I've got a prop forward." He said he's not a big guy, but he said he's very, very fit and very committed. I'll get him up for you. So he brought this fellow up, and in the course of it all emerged that he'd just come back from rowing from the South Island to the North Island, and very fit and so on. And so we said we're not going back empty-handed, and there could be a prize. His name was Bill Noonan, and we signed him up on the spot, and he came to Canterbury. In his very first game, we played South, and Sattler was giving him a bad time. And at half time I said to him, "You've got to go out there and you've got to run this ball into Sattler and run over the top of him," and etc., etc., etc. I said, "If you don't do that, you can go back to New Zealand." And he went out and he did exactly that and never looked back. He's a great asset to Canterbury and played there for a long number of years.
You also had Les Johns in that team.
Oh yeah, great one. Only a little fella, but totally committed. Newcastle boy, loved his game, loved his commitment, and he had a great step and all the rest of it, and speedy, and a great one. If he hadn't been at the same time as Langlands, he would have been the regular. Although no, he had another opposition there, Ken Thornett, who was a great fullback. There were three great fullbacks. They were all in that 63 side. Johns, Thornett and Langlands. Although Langlands played in the centre mainly, I think, in those days.
Les Johns, another coal mining background.
Yeah, not that Les would have been in the mines. No, but Eddie Lumsden was in the mines. He's a big, strong winger, very much bigger than Les. But Les was, very skillful and all the rest of it, and committed. But Eddie Lumsden was been in the mines, worked as a bloke there 15, 16 in the mines in Lithgow, and not Lithgow, outside Newcastle somewhere.
You bring up Peter Bullfrog Moore, one of the great characters of the game. Do you have any thoughts about him and his style?
Oh yeah, he was great. He just loved his football. He played a bit himself. I think he played reserve grade or something somewhere. I don't know whether it was Canterbury or not, but he loved the game, and he loved it. He didn't let anything else interfere with his family and his love of the game, and he was a great success. I see where his daughter has now run a reform campaign modelled on what Peter ran in 1969 and won, and I think she'll do very well too, because she seems to be committed to the same sort of approach as her dad.
Yeah, it's a good time for Canterbury.
It's funny because Bullfrog was kind of an institution when we were growing up, but he was like very much one of the young Turks of rugby league administration when you were at Canterbury. Did you notice a difference in style or approach between him and Facer?
They were similar in this way, that they both loved the game and had good experience. Moore didn't play as high as Facer, who played first grade and won grand finals, but Peter had played seconds and loved his football, junior football and so on. So they both committed that way, so they're very similar. In terms of smartness, they're both smart guys. Peter had his own business. He ran a news agency and so on, and So they're very similar there, but and both very socially attractive. They, decent guys. I loved meeting people, all the rest of it.
Legendary figure.
Mm-hmm.
About the actual football in '67, when you took over, the St George legends lament letting you go and then taking the St George knowledge and fitness over there and your own attitude and everything like that. When you got the side, what sort of shape were they in?
Well, they weren't into rigorous training. Conditioning wasn't a big issue. So I introduced, we got them all regularly over to Oakley Park and running up hills in Oakley Park and along the river there, and then climbing ropes and that was very important. Climbing ropes, it gives them confidence, of their own weight and use their own weight and their own body, and it became a staple part of our conditioning. Then during the season, we'd get out there, every other week sort of this. So conditioning was a big thing, and then attitude was the next big thing. And I think I got them all on side, and they had the attitude very similar to St George in the end, that they were out there to win.
Was it a case of you walk in with your record and they respect you automatically, or was it a bit of pushback on the fitness? Or?
I think you have to earn your way wherever you go. If you don't perform on the field or off the field as a coach, you'll soon lose the support. You have to get in there and do it.
Seems like attitude's a big part of your success on and off the field. Would you say?
Attitude is everything, and that, if I can say this, I think this is the problem with the modern game. There's no commitment there. Players generally, there are exceptions obviously, but players generally aren't committed to winning. It's as simple as that. It might sound a bit basic, but that's what it's all about, because it's only when you're committed to winning that you play attractive football.
Let's turn to the final in '67. You ending St George's run. It must have been a strange feeling to be on the other side of the field.
Yeah, it was a great feeling, but at the same time it was a mixture of regret there that I was bringing them down, or I was captain coach of the team that brought them down. But as I say, if Ron Raper hadn't got Gasnier down in 10 minutes to go or 5 minutes to go or something, we wouldn't have won it.
And you visited the St George dressing room after the match.
Oh, yeah.
And can you take us into that dressing room? What was the atmosphere?
Well, it was subdued, to say the least, I suppose. They just couldn't believe it after 10 years. And obviously I didn't get a very enthusiastic greeting from the officials. Players were no problem. But I can't remember any officials enthusiastically greeting me or congratulating me.
Well, I think there's a story about when Clive Churchill was coaching Canterbury, South officials were like, out of here, Churchill. So it just shows you the blokes running the game at that time.
It's an incredible feat though. You win all the grand finals with them, and then you're in the streaks. You've got a major part of rugby league history. So something to be proud of.
What about that South team that you played the following week? Obviously, they were the next great team after St George.
Yeah. What
was it like playing against them?
Well, I was familiar with them obviously from St George, but I'm not complaining, but we could have won that game. It was pretty close. I think 2 points in. Mm-hmm. I think it was only 2 points in, and we had a few problems in the. With the fitness, actually, I forget who it was. A couple of our players had problems towards the end there, and I don't think there was any replacements in those days. Well, there might have been one. Well, I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Was it the era where they brought in where you could replace a player up until half time? Had that rule come in by then?
I can't remember now, but there certainly weren't 6 reserves sitting on the sideline. You had to, and they couldn't just be replaced. They had to be a genuine injury. They had to be off.
Well, I think the replacement had to have played a full reserve grade game.
That's right, or at least half, I think, but had to play in the reserve grade,
a part of the history of the game that we can't believe as younger fellows is the switch from unlimited to limited, and not just limited, 4 tackles. That must have been amazing.
Yeah, well, we combated that pretty well, I think, because, and I was lucky here, I had Les Johns and I had George Tailforth, who were, either of whom could do an up and ender only 10 metres. Now, they kick them 20, it's too long. You'd put them up 10, 15, 20 metres at the most, and your forwards arrived there when they were catching it, and obviously they dropped a lot, and you'd get positioned back. So, and obviously there wasn't time to lay down elaborate moves or anything, but we still scored tries, but our main feat at Canterbury was to stop the scoring against us. At the end of the season, when the stats came out, we had a for and against. We weren't at the top of the points scored, but in terms against, we were way up front, hundreds of points, 300, 400 points in front, in the terms of not conceding points, just by sheer defence. It was all about defence.
We didn't bring this up earlier about your early playing career, but you were known as a one-on-one tackler.
Yeah. Well, I did actually see St George never had any gang tackles or anything. It was mainly one-on-one with St George, 2 at the most, and that's the history I had with St George, or the background of St George, and I introduced that to Canterbury, that I didn't want any second players. I didn't like second players around me because, if you're going in really hard, well, you end up hurting your fellow player there, so I didn't like being supported. Obviously there's times when someone's got to assist you, but most times if you go in low and hard and wrap your arms and keep driving, you'll put them on the ground with the ball, and that's the way it's got to be.
Well,
it should be, it's not now.
I was going to say the difference between tackling then and now. We've heard some of your tackles around the chest as being described as a stick hitting a hollow log. Is that something you remember going in there to...
Yeah, well, I picked that up probably from Killarney, who was always about going in and at the last moment dropping your shoulder into the solar plexus, and which helped a lot in putting them on the ground. So, yeah, I probably used to do it in rugby union, but not as much as I did under Carney.
Excellent.
Yeah. I want to talk about your post-football life a bit, and a story that I keep coming back to is one that Ian Heads told me, that when you were playing at St George, he went round to your place for an interview once, and I think you were rehabbing from maybe the 63 injury, but you had some bricks on your ankles, doing weights with your bricks while reading a law book.
Yeah, well, I started studying law at the end of 64, actually, okay. So that would have been right. I had a full-length plaster on in England, but I came home and I played the full season, so thanks to a very good surgeon in the north of England who did a tremendous job on me. And but at the end of 64, I was probably still exercising my leg and keeping it strong, but I started studying then, and next year, 65, I came into the law library in town. I don't know whether it was out of a desire to help me or get rid of me, but the librarian referred me to the law school. I hadn't thought of joining the law school at that stage, so I came to the law school, which now houses a part of the Leeds Club, and I got in there and was okay from then on.
So you were thinking about post-football life pretty early in the piece then?
I didn't let it interfere that much with the football. Well, I played another, 3 seasons, or 3 or 4 seasons after doing that. But I was always, I dropped out of university doing law way back when I left high school, 10 years before. And I'm eternally grateful to John Gorton, who was the Minister for Education at the time, and he was approached by Frank Stewart, who was the Labor member for Canterbury, and I had played with Canterbury, and approached on my behalf, and he put it to Gorton, and Gorton turned a few things over and got me back into the Commonwealth Scholarship. So I was right then.
Fantastic. Also, I mean, you're a highly respected barrister, but you're also the mayor of Hurstville.
Yes, they were heady days. The mayoralty, dealing with Westfield and people like that.
I mean, surely being involved with St George Rugby League administration would have given you some good skills for the behind-the-scenes dealings of politics. Yeah,
it was good. It's all good background. Dealing with people, that's what it's all about. And I appreciated my rugby league background in many areas of my political career, in terms of dealing with people and meeting their needs and requests and what have you, and also in the argy-bargy of caucus meetings and what have you.
We didn't bring up your nickname, Kandos. Now, what's the origin of that?
I picked that up at St George. I'm not surprised, but maybe I've got it right, that Billy Wilson thought about it and nicknamed me Kandos, which was where they'd mined, they mine out near Lithgow. Would have been coal, or no, it must have been iron, I think. Oh, no, that'll be it. Yeah, it must have steel, iron. Yeah.
I've got to think David Gillespie coming in. There's a bit of passing off there, is there not? Cement.
Yeah, well, he was a good one, Gillespie, and a very decent bloke, and I used to meet up with him a few times after I'd finished and he was playing.
Kandos and cement. That's like a TV show. I mean.
Talking about that era, you became boss of the Players Association. At the time that you were finishing your career, the Dennis Tuddy case was going on.
Yeah.
Was that something you were thinking about at that time? That
I was always very much aware of the Tuddy case, because from memory it happened in the early 60s.
Late 60s.
Late
60s.
Late 60s, yeah. And Bill Dean, who was later on the Governor-General, took it on spec. That means he'd run it for Tuddy to the High Court and didn't charge unless he won. And he ended up winning. And I was always very interested, both from a personal point of view, because I'd admired Tuddy. He was a genuine amateur. He rode for Australia and I think Olympics, but certainly Commonwealth. And here he was. He played for no money. He got no money from Balmain, and yet when he wanted to go and pick up a bit of money at the end of his career with Penrith, Kevin Humphrey stood in his way, and so I was always behind him when he took it on. But even though Bill Dean appeared for him and got him up and so on, it had a big toll on him. And I remember when we were running the draft case, I ran into him at somewhere, and he was still pretty cut up about that, the way he'd been treated by Balmain. And he was a cousin, incidentally, of Reg Cassius. Not that they ever, got together on the field or anything, but he was a lanky, fast runner and determined, and had a lot of stamina, and was a great asset to Balmain. They'd got him for nothing for 5-6 years or something. And they stood in his way when he wanted to make a quid at the end.
So are those sorts of incidents what made you get involved with the Players Association?
Oh yeah, definitely. But what led me directly to the Players Association was the draft. I was out to stop the draft, and a group of coaches mainly, and a few players had come to see me at some stage, the late 80s I suppose, and told me, I was aware of the draft, but told me how it was affecting them, and the main things was interference with their freedom. They couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't transfer, and they could be transferred on the other hand without their knowledge. Clubs could get together and send them off to, in those days it would have been outposts. They're playing in West Australia, and later South Australia, North Queensland. They could have, or New Zealand, they could have been set over there with no consideration of their kids' education or their income or their home life. So we took it up seriously, and I had a very devoted group of players and coaches, and we then said, well, we've got to get down on the Players' Union was in bed with the league, with John Quayle in the league. They were running for the draft. So we thought we had got to get rid of them out of the Players' Association, which we did. It was a hard battle, but a few difficult meetings and special general meetings and things like that. But finally we did, and we implemented. We'd won it in court. Well, we hadn't lost it in court. We'd won it at the first Supreme Court level, and then the league had appealed to the federal court and then the High Court and lost it. So it was in, but it had to be implemented, and the only way to do it was, because John Quayle was still there, was to get the Players' Association on side. And I was very fortunate. One name comes to mind was Paul Langback, but there were something like 17 or 18 or 19, something like that, of players put their homes on the line because they were the actual plaintiffs, the actual players. So, 19 of them just signed up, put their, might have been more, might have been in the 20s, put their homes on the line just to as security for running it against the league, which had all the funds, and fortunately we won.
That's an incredible story. It's a history corner itself.
Yeah, I've actually been doing a lot of, in the lead up to this, doing a lot of reading on the newspaper reports at the time, and it seems there are a few barbs flying in both directions as the court cases were going. How was your relationship with the league and Quayle in particular at that point?
Not good. I didn't trust him. I thought he was had his self-interest at the forefront of all his dealings at the league. I mean, you look across the road for where we're sitting now, Phillip Street, and that Leagues Club is gone. When I came to Sydney from Brisbane, that was their proud claim. We own our Leagues Club. This is our big asset. With blokes like Jersey Flegg and Bill Buckley and so on. That was their big goal in life, own that Leagues Club. And finally, when they were within range of owning it, it got inveigled in all these dealings between the rugby league headed by Quayle, and it was sold.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever repaired that relationship with Quayle?
I frankly haven't seen him. I haven't seen him physically in probably in 20 years, 25 years.
Just on the draft, it just seems every few years that a new idea is brought up, we need to get another draft. Fundamentally, it seems like a restraint of trade, yet it's worked in other sports. Can you see a scenario where a draft could be implemented?
In other sports?
In rugby league?
I think there's nothing wrong with the present system. We just knocked it out. I don't think you actually need a scheme. Maybe on closer examination you'd say, well, we'll bring in some sort of scheme, but there's no draft. So that's it. Players are free. They can do their own bargaining and play where they want to. That's what it's all about. Really, restraint of trade, restraint of freedom, and ability to earn where you want to.
I think other sports, if they challenged it, they would lose it as well. But I mean, they just accepted them.
Yeah. I don't think you need any elaborate legal frameworks. You just, pass some resolutions. It's out. It's not to be brought in.
Yeah. And a few years after that, we had the Super League war. What were your thoughts at the time on what was going on there?
A little bit mixed, actually. I could see values on both sides. But because I think England had gone before us, hadn't they? They had a Super League side over there, a Super League system over there. But I didn't get really committed either way. I remember the guy from Brisbane Broncos. What was his name? Went to Melbourne.
Rebo.
Rebo did a great job for the against the scheme. But I think we're better off without any restrictions. Freedom, that's what it's all about. Play the game and go where you want to and send your kids wherever you want to and so on.
And the Players Association itself, it has ebbed and flowed in terms of strength and influence over the years. It seems in a pretty strong position at the moment. Were you watching the developments last year closely?
Not closely, no. It's capable of being a very powerful organisation, but you've got to be wary that when organisations become very powerful, sometimes that power is used in the wrong direction or for purposes that aren't legitimate. But you certainly need a strong and efficient one, and they appear to have that at the moment. I don't know, I haven't looked at it closely. Do
you think a rugby league knowledge trumps legal knowledge in that sort of position, or do you think?
They're both very important, obviously. Obviously, the legal finesse is the final. If it goes to the court, well, that's what you've got to have. But getting the understanding of the players and getting their commitment and so on, which I think we did at that time, when we had 20 odd blokes, I think it was nearly 30 blokes put their name on the line to put their house and income at risk, to win this case. That's how they thought about it. And they really believed in freedom of action and freedom to play.
Warren Ryan was an ally in that fight, was he not?
He came a little bit later, but he would have been in spirit. He certainly would have been in spirit. I don't think he was coaching at the time.
No, he was coaching West because he was at the forefront throwing grenades at Quayle and Co.
Was that in the draft or the Super League?
The draft.
Draft, yeah. Well, he must have been in this group of on memory he was in this group of there was about 10 or 12 coaches and players. I remember anyway. Yeah.
Do you have a relationship with Warren?
I had a pretty close relationship with Warren up till some years ago, but I haven't. I moved, I think, and sort of got out of focus. I used to be around the city in Woolloomooloo and so on, and I used to meet up with him, but not in recent times.
He's been a subject of a history corner on our.
Sorry?
He's been a subject of a history corner himself. We haven't interviewed him, but we did one on him.
Oh, right, yeah.
He's a legendary coach.
Yeah, but I can remember him in his playing days, and he came from the bush, I think. And he tried out with St George.
Yeah, I think he was in the lower grades there in the late 60s.
And he played with St George for a year or two in the lower grades. But at that time, St George had their top backs running around and so on, and he didn't go anywhere. But then he went from there to West. Anyway, but he probably distinguished himself. I remember when he was coaching Balmain, I went out there and spoke to his team a couple of times, and for all big games, grand finals possibly.
Fantastic.
I wanted to ask, just as we're wrapping up, you're 83, still a practicing barrister. It's fair to say some of your contemporaries haven't done as well for themselves, and I wonder how that makes you feel, or how do you account for that?
Well, luck always plays a big role. And also I had a very hard skull, which protected me from head bumps. So that was, lucky break. Also, I suppose, being in the legal world, I tended to be more devoted to what I was doing and more committed, whereas a lot of these players, once they beat stars and then they sort of not going anywhere or sort of wafting sideways, and they probably lose their commitment. And a lot of, but there's I can think of a half a dozen players with St George who are still very committed to what they're doing and getting on with life.
Is that something you noticed over the years, the players who are really struggling with life after football and making that switch? Yeah,
well, I think Changa was one of them, and he was unfortunate in that his family relationships broke up, and that didn't help him, and then he was in an area which is subject to a lot of problems and temptation. That's the liquor industry, clubs and pubs and so on. So he had a hard road to hoe there, and also he had this head problem. I don't know for sure, but we had a parade at the cricket ground some years ago, and we were in an open car cavalcade, and we're going around. We're just sitting up at top, no seatbelts or anything, and he fell out. Thing pulled up suddenly and hurt his head. And I've always wondered whether that contributed to his I think it was clarified as dementia or something, dementia problem, and or whether it was a separate event, but I've got a feeling it might have contributed. So, and he wasn't really looked after that.
Do you think the league's done enough in looking after old players?
I'd have to sort of look into that a bit more before I gave an opinion, but I remember I actually said to him twice, do you want me to take up the cudgels for you and run a legal case? I said it's sheer negligence, you'll have no trouble winning it, and it depends on what injuries you've got, and all of this could have been explored. But I think he was non-committal, and I didn't pursue it. But I think that at that stage there was probably someone on his ear and maybe misleading him, but I don't know.
I mean, on the subject of Graham Langlands, even his friends say he's a prickly character. Is that how you found him?
Yeah, he was prickly, but that's the way he was, and he performed.
Yeah.
I mean, if blokes delivered on the field, well, they justified their prickliness or whatever it might be. And he did. He was not the most communicative bloke, so I can imagine, how he had personal problems, but he is a well-meaning, decent bloke who, as far as I was concerned, I mean, the outstanding thing, I can remember many outstanding things, but one that comes readily to mind was that when a ball was kicked over, I think it might have been Balmain, one of the grand finals with Balmain, and the ball was going over the sideline. He leapt at a 45-degree angle across the sideline, hit the ball in space over the sideline, knocked it back in, landed on his feet, came around, picked it up and ran 60 or 70 metres, gave it to Johnny King, who scored.
Incredible.
The ever-present Johnny King, there was a great one.
One of the things that really made me upset reading that Never Before, Never Again book was how little respect or attention the St George administration seemed to give your era of players. I wonder how your relationship with St George is now.
It's not very warm. Well, most of the old crew have gone in the administration, but I think there could have been an element of jealousy there. There could have been an element of escape from the past, instead of having this past hammered into them all the time. Why don't you be like those guys, I think a lot of the officials tried to get away from it, and in doing so they lost it. St George, been in the last 20, 30 years have just been gone from king of the pack down to nothing, which is sad.
Oh, tell me about it. I've been following them all those years. Do you have any other questions?
No, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. It's been an honour for us to interview you.
Yeah, absolute honour, yeah.
And it's good to get these stories on tape.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I enjoyed reminiscing.
Yeah, oh, great. All right, thank you, Kevin
very much.
Ryan.